So to start off, hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Moby.
Hi, Bagel.
Hi, Moby.
So before we get into today's really interesting conversation, I wanted to address that the last couple weeks have been really busy.
We've done a lot.
We've done a lot.
You've done a lot.
So first and foremost, I think what's interesting is we went to Washington, D.C. as lobbyists to lobby the federal government to have plant-based meals at all federal facilities.
Which is shocking to me in ways that it doesn't exist. But then, I think of some other places I've lived in the country, and it's often an afterthought, if not an ever thought.
And the thing I think is funniest about it is there is one federal institution that has plant-based options for every meal.
One of the coziest institutions of all.
Prisons. So prisons have you can get a plant-based vegan meal at a federal prison, but not at federal buildings. So,
prisons are nothing if not accommodating.
Okay, so that was interesting. Then we went to New York, and we had a lot of fun, interesting things happen in New York.
Some business.
And then again, before I'm trying to rush through this, because I don't want to give short shrift to all the stuff that's happened, but we also want to get to our very fascinating conversation with Joe Manganiello. And before we get into our conversation with him, I did want to mention, so I'm doing my first tour in 10 years.
And you have mentioned on this podcast a couple of times that you do not really enjoy tour life. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I love staying home. I love working on music. I love working on animal activism and politics. I love going hiking. I love having smoothies in the morning and reading the New York Times. Being on tour, I really don't like it. But the way that this tour was quote unquote sold to me, my manager, Eric, who I've worked with for the longest time, I've worked with him for over 30 years. And the way he got me to do the tour, I think was kind of interesting. He basically said, okay, what if we do a short tour and all of your profits go to animal rights organizations? And I think he knew that that's the only thing I couldn't say no to. Like if he'd said, here's all this money, or we'll have a massage therapist on tour with you, or you get paid in cryptocurrency that looks like little animatronic space aliens, like none of that would have enticed me. But saying to me, you can go on tour, deal with insomnia, and you won't get paid a penny, that's the way he sold it to me.
Yeah, just make it altruistic and suddenly it's a lot more appealing.
And that way I have to do it. I can't cancel because I can cancel or avoid things for myself selfishly, but if I know that there's a way to benefit animals potentially or benefit animal rights organizations, I can't say no.
So true. And I love that. And I think it's so unbelievably generous and selfless. But also, can I just say that a 25th anniversary of Play is I think emotionally and as a milestone, a very big deal that I think it's important to commemorate big moments like that.
Okay. And I respectfully acknowledge the potential truth in what you've just said.
Play could rent a car legally now.
Wow. That's so old. And we are going to do a special Play 25 Moby Pod event.
We are.
The only thing is we don't exactly know where and when. So once we know where and when, we'll announce it here first.
And we're going to sell tickets so anybody can come.
Yep. And probably sometime in May or June.
Late May, early June, something like that.
So, okay. There. Now, and also I just released a song with Lady Blackbird that you DJ'd with in the last Moby Pod.
Dark Days, which I love that song. And I know we say it all the time, but Lady Blackbird is a gift to this planet.
She's a 1 in a billion. Her voice is amazing. Her demeanor is so interesting. It's like she stepped out of a time portal from 1930. There's something, but 1930, but also she stepped out of a time portal from 5,000 years in the future. I love that I can't figure her out, but she's also just unfailingly nice and creative and
wonderful.
Like, I can't say enough nice things about her.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and I'm very, very excited about this song. I hope everybody likes it as much as I like it, because I really like it.
And you also had a very active hand in making the video. We walked around and we shot stuff. And we went to outer space. We shot some outer space stuff.
We shot all the way out in outer space.
So now...
And also you shot a video and you didn't even wear shoes.
Yeah, that's gross, huh?
Yeah, that's free feet. That's wiki feet right there.
So now, finally, we can talk about Joe Manganiello, my friend whose last name I can't pronounce. And here's why I wanted to talk to Joe. Because a lot of people would look at Joe Manganiello and think like, oh, he's like 6'4" and the most handsome person on the planet. Like, he is the ultimate hunk. He's so much of a hunk. He was one of the leads in Magic Mike. Like, you can't get hunkier than that.
Yeah, it's ultimate Hunksville.
But here's what people are going to learn that we learned in our conversation with Joe. He is a nerd. And not a nerd like, oh, look at me, I'm such a nerd. Like, he's true blue hardcore nerd.
And committed.
Yeah.
So committed. Like, let us set the scene. Walking into Joe's home where we recorded this episode, would you like to describe the room that you enter into when you walk into Joe's home?
Yes. So here's the thing. I, for quite a while, have known that Joe is a Dungeons and Dragons enthusiast. And what that usually means is someone like me or Stephen Colbert, who like played in junior high school, and maybe we have a couple of D&D games in our closet. Joe has the entire downstairs of his home is devoted to D&D. He has a Dungeons and Dragons table.
The biggest table I've ever seen.
It's about 30 feet long, covered with D&D stuff. He has every D&D game that's ever been made. It's a Dungeons and Dragons museum. And he plays Dungeons and Dragons multiple times a week with
He's
this
very
amazing,
committed,
wonderful, random bunch of people.
Can you explain the large busts and figures?
So I can never really pronounce it. Gary Gygax, the guy who sort of invented D&D. I wish I could. I can't remember his exact. It's something like Gygax.
Gravlax? No, I think that's a sort of salmon.
Okay.
Gargax.
So something Gary Gygax. I want to. Okay. In any case, Bale's barking because she knows I'm mispronouncing his name. He created a lot of monsters for D&D, and so Joe has gigantic heads, obviously not the real monster heads. He has gigantic fake monster heads covering the walls, and they're
like mounted heads, like a deer, or a crazy person might have a deer in their house, but these are the monsters.
And
from
luckily
Dungeons
they were
and
not
Dragons.
hurt. Like the crazy person with the deer would have to hurt the deer to have the deer on the wall. In Joe's case, he just had them made. So he has these giant monsters, and then he has freestanding giant monsters. It's unbelievable. So that's his entire ground floor of his house, where someone else would have like a man cave with like a pinball machine and like an ironic neon sign. He has over like 1,500 square feet of Dungeons and Dragons museum stuff. So that's nerd point number one. And
Garlax? No.
I think it's Gygax.
Maybe.
But I'm going to stick with Gygax. But here's the other thing. When I got to know Joe a few years ago, I learned, we're going to talk about this in the interview, but I learned something so interesting. He was a raver. And keep in mind, when I was growing up, when I was in high school, and then after that, the kids like me who were, into punk rock or then became ravers and were into Dungeons and Dragons, we were the little ones. We were the ones who were ignored by everyone. We couldn't play sports. We didn't have girlfriends. We hung out with each other and insulted one another and listened to records and played Dungeons and Dragons. But Joe was that. But he was also the captain of every sports team in his high school. So I want to ask him about that. How do you reconcile being 6'4" superhuman, but also a Dungeons and Dragons playing rave music nerd?
It's a fascinating question, but also he is a very driven, very passionate person. And one thing that he is passionate about that I want to mention before we go into this interview is Bubbles, the dog.
Bubbles, yes. And so I'm glad you brought up Bubbles, because Bubbles is amazing. Bubbles only likes one person on the planet, as far as we know, and that person is Joe. And Joe and Bubbles are inseparable.
They never are apart. If you go near Joe or even really look at Joe, Bubbles isn't happy about it.
And Bubbles weighs approximately 3 pounds. Bubbles is the smallest living thing I've ever seen in my entire life. But also because Bubbles doesn't like other humans, but Bubbles especially doesn't like other dogs. So unfortunately, we had to find a bagel sitter for Bagel. So Bagel was not present during the interview with Joe.
She was not. She was with our dear friend Stella, and they had the best time ever.
Yeah.
But yeah, she could not come with us. But I love their relationship, Bubbles and Joe. It's so cute.
I mean, he's this big super hunk of a human, and she weighs 3 pounds. Like, it's like, yeah, it's like they're a symbiotic organism. So what else do we want to say? Because we should jump in. We've been rambling on like crazy people. We should start playing the interview.
I want to say this conversation that we have with Joe is fascinating. He's so unbelievably forthcoming about his sobriety and spiritual journey and his family history, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see someone just be so open with so much about their life, their personal life. But also there's so much that we didn't get to touch on. Like, I had all of these questions about his coming up in the theater and going to Carnegie Mellon and all of the things. He's done so much very, very cool theater. Mm-hmm. But we didn't really get to touch on it because we went in so many other directions that I was like, no, let's just go with what we're doing here.
And the last thing I'll say, and then we're in the next 15 seconds, we're going to jump into the interview, is because we were by the beach and it was very nice outside. So the windows were open. So you will hear some background noise. And without further ado, let's go talk to Joe.
Let's talk to Joe.
So Joe.
Yes.
Lindsay.
Yeah.
Bubbles.
Bubbles
is asleep.
She's asleep.
Sorry. I'm so sorry, Bubbles.
It's like,
it's okay.
I just feel like I just woke the baby.
Bubbles, I'm sorry.
Go back. It's okay. Yeah.
So there's so much that we want to talk about. One of the first things, and maybe I'm like giving away all the stuff that we wanted to talk about, but when I was getting to know you and also doing some homework, I realized something. If I was to describe you to someone, if I said like, okay, my friend Joe, like, he's obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons. He's obsessed with like some of the mystical aspects of 12-step programs in Carl Jung. Mm-hmm. He was a raver in high school. Mm-hmm. They'd be like, oh, so he's like a little nerd like you. Like, and then they would see you and they'd realize, well, you don't look like a nerd. So my question is,
what does a nerd look like?
I think you're looking at him. Like, a nerd is me. A nerd is like bald, bad teeth, glasses.
But why does a nerd have to look a certain way? Isn't a nerd, aren't we describing what someone is on the inside or what they're attracted to? I mean, isn't it like close your eyes and it sounds like a nerd, it's a nerd?
In a very idealized way. I feel like a lot of nerds felt like we didn't have a choice. Like for example, when we were in school, we were like, well, we're bad at sports. We're not smart enough to really like start computer companies. So let's go play D&D and listen to electronic music because that was the only thing left available to us.
Well, I would say along those lines, I don't know that I chose to be a nerd. I just am one. Mm-hmm. I mean, not in the physical way. Not saying that like, well, I had all these other options, because I think like sometimes people ask me, they say, oh, I heard a story that, you tore your knee in football and then you went into acting, and it's like, no, I was always an artist. It was just a matter of what discipline I was going to pursue, or at least like start the journey on. So, growing up, I was a very, very intellectual, very thoughtful, very empathetic kid. And I was having a conversation with a friend of mine at dinner the other night, and because he was an artist, and we were. Do you know David Cho?
I know the name.
Well, his books on my. We can pull his book out, but he's a great artist. He's the one kind of famously painted the Facebook studios for stock rather than money, and then Facebook stole, and he's can do whatever he wants, and he's a great actor too. He was in that show Beef that just came out last year, which is great if you haven't watched it. But anyway, David Cho, what's up? And but we were talking about how previous generations never talked about anything. Like it was just stoic. Shut your mouth. You came back from World War II. You never talk about it ever. Like Vietnam, don't talk about it. Never. Don't talk about trauma. Don't talk about feelings. And then every once in a while, an artist comes along who's like the black sheep of the family, and it's your job to talk about everything. And everybody just wants you to shut up about it all. And I think like that's who I was when I kind of slid down the chute into life on planet Earth. I was like, hey, like this is who I am, and so I think nerd, artist, curiosity, being curious, and also kind of gravitating towards certain things, which you kind of give the preamble. We'll get into. Some of those things are positive, some of those things are negative. I think when you have a personality like that, you can be very, very attracted to some of the negative aspects in life, and then there's some of the positive aspects in life, and it kind of becomes a struggle between heaven and hell in this whole
it's funny when
experience.
when I first got sober for real, I noticed a few recurring trends in the meetings I went to, and one of them was like a lot of times people were giving their share about addiction, and they were talking about their childhoods, and almost invariably they talked about losing themselves in books.
Yes.
Like and a lot of losing themselves in fantasy, and I was like, oh well, you mean like reading Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion and drawing maps of my hometown that tried to make it look like J.R.R. Tolkien had drawn them. So it seems like you might have identified as someone who as a child lost yourself in stories and books. And
I and yes, when I reached the point where it was time to get sober and really started looking at why I had such a problem with reality. Like why? I mean, there was a book about the Loch Ness Monster when I was a kid that I don't think it was ever in the library. It was at my house. Like if somebody else wanted to read it or I heard that, okay, I'll bring it for you tomorrow. You can read it, but then it comes back home with me. Because I just wanted to believe that there was something other than all of this.
Yeah. I don't want to project, but on one hand, like I grew up with trauma. Yeah. But I also grew up in the suburbs, and the suburbs are safe, but they're so dull. And I'm not trying to criticize them because it's kind of nice that they're dull because dull oftentimes comes along with safety. But it was...
Well, and safety means you have the time to do artistic things.
And also the amount of, call it like disposable time, at least I had growing up. I don't know if it was like that for you guys, but yes. Hours and hours of nothing, but like kind of wonderful nothing, where it's like, okay, let's get on our bikes and let's go find an abandoned house to explore. Yeah. Let's listen to records. Let's go to the library and take out books about the Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah.
But there's one thing I really wanted to bring up, which might be a little surprising. I can't remember if we talked about this or not. Before I really discovered music, I had one obsession. Well, books and science fiction. But my obsession, you ready?
Okay.
The Pittsburgh Steelers.
We didn't talk about that.
From the time I was 8...
see, now I'm surprised, and that's not fair.
Why is that not fair?
Well, because, okay, so in this equation, you're the self-professed nerd, and I'm the jock, and we're finding common ground.
That's
in the 80s. This is an 80s movie right now that we're entering into.
But also, it surprises me because now, whenever I mention sports, you become upset. You don't even want to think about sports now.
I like playing sports. I just don't know anything about professional sports. But from the time I was 8 until 12, obsessed with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Obsessed. Like this is
70s Steelers?
Yes, this is like Franco Harris, Terry Bradshaw, Lynn Swann, Mean Joe Green.
Jack Lambert, no teeth. Yeah.
So I was so obsessed. One of the most emotionally upsetting moments of my life was the year, I forget what would it have been, 78? 79? They lost the Super Bowl, I
wait.
think, to the Cowboys.
Well,
I
they
forget.
won all 4 that they played in, but
Okay.
there was the 76 season. The team was so good. That was the best team that they had, but they didn't make it that year.
Okay, well, there's one, maybe that was, I just remember being like despondent. And my mother sort of being concerned. She was like, why?
Well, there was Super Bowl 30, which was in the 90s when they played the Cowboys. This would have been 70s.
Yeah,
So 70s they were 4 for 4, but then they lost to the Cowboys in the 90s.
Okay.
I was the
So I just thought I'd bring that up as like looking for a little common ground and also outing myself as someone who many, many years ago was obsessed with professional sports. I was so obsessed, I think I was 9 years old. My mom and my grandmother came to me and asked me what I wanted for my birthday. And I wanted a subscription to the Sporting News.
I like
Sporting News.
Did you like the numbers and
I
statistics?
loved the number. I used to make my same thing for the Yankees. I would make my own scorecards. I would figure out like RBIs and percentages.
Did you ever like playing cards when you were younger?
I love playing cards.
That was like a really crazy, like numbers were really soothing to me. And I remember being young, playing cards with the adults, and I could tell what they had in their hand, and I knew not to play, and I would always win. And then I didn't play cards for years, and I got invited to play in this poker tournament. I thought, all right, fine, I'll go. And, and it was like a $10,000 buy-in. And there were like 36 people. There were pros in it. But I was going because it was my friend's charity. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll go, and I'll see him, and we'll hang out, and blah, blah, blah. And I won it, and I hadn't played in decades,
Wow.
and I beat like pros. Like it was, like numbers for me were always, like I was a really math brain, like very good math SAT, like weird, so I was just wondering if like that lent itself to you, because I know electronic music is a lot of numbers
Yeah.
as well.
Linz, what do you think?
Well, no, I feel like you are connecting over sports, and I really am happy that that's happening, and I support it.
Houston Oilers? No. Houston Texans? Houston
Well, I feel like
Astros? No.
I feel like I'm very supportive of people reaching their like athletic dreams,
Yeah.
and all of their goals, but
Sounds so diplomatic.
no, I love it when people's dreams come true. And I feel like anyone on a professional team, their dreams are coming true, and I think that's poetic.
That's nice, though.
Yeah, professional athletes. I
Yeah.
think there's something very poetic about a professional athlete's journey.
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
I think that's very beautiful. But when it comes to like the individual teams, I tend not to pick one because I'm proud of everyone.
That's not. Well,
Wow.
see, what I also
No, you're
think-
not.
Yes, I am. There's no professional athlete I'm not proud of that I can think of
Michael
right
Vick?
now.
I could probably.
Oh, except for Michael Vick. He can
I
suck
could
it.
bring up a bunch of others that I won't.
Okay, I'm sure there's
but
some
yeah,
athletes that are terrible people, but I would say
OJ Simpson, living the dream. Yeah.
he was very charming.
Okay, we might want to edit that part out. I'm like, so
But also
You
like
set me
I
up.
think the city you grow up in also culturally, like in Pittsburgh, on Sundays the street lights are all on blink because no one's on the street.
Mm-hmm.
Sunday, you watch the game, like everybody. And there was one bar called New York, which was a gay bar. And on Sundays, all the guys were in there watching the Steelers. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't matter what walk of life, male, female, like straight, gay, black, white, brown, yellow, whatever it is. Like if you grow up in that, you root for the Steelers.
Yeah.
And you know who the fourth string tight end is coming off of injured reserve. Like
Yeah.
So it's fun. Like all the girls in Pittsburgh, they won't wear those pink jerseys that the league makes. They're like, we wear the real ones. It's like Spartan culture.
Right. I love that. It's like this cultural thing that everyone agrees on. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's community. And I'm pro community.
There it is.
Lindsay, when did you become so like diplomatic? You're like the
Well, when it comes to
Switzerland
sports,
of-
I feel like because I sometimes feel like there are some people that know all the stats and know all the players, and sometimes I feel a little bit like, is it bad that I don't? But then where I find my sense of self-worth in this is that I do care, but on a more general level about everyone's
That's nice.
everyone's
Yeah,
experience.
that's great.
Who are you?
But also, I think, I also moved around a lot when I was a kid. Like, we landed in Houston, but we moved around a lot. So I think I saw a lot of these different people with their different cities having a very similar kind of communal experience with different teams. And so I kind of, I was kind of forced to see it all from the outside because I was always going to different places. So I think that's part of it too.
Okay.
But I was also a cheerleader, and I had to care a lot for a long time. And I think it's good to kind of, I cared a lot when I was a cheerleader.
Like the Faith No More song.
I care a lot.
Yeah.
Bum, 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 bum.
And okay, so we've mentioned sobriety a couple times, and I'm going to state the obvious. Sobriety oftentimes is the happy result of addiction.
Yeah. Why? You hear people say, "I'm a grateful addict," or
Yeah.
I'm lucky to be." And I used to think that was the most ridiculous, forced thing anyone could say, but you then realize that it's an acceptance of the call to spirituality.
So I want to get to that because that's what really excites me, and also we're going to be talking about the sort of the spiritual aspects of the 12 steps later. But
great. Yeah.
addiction. When did you first discover? What was your drug of choice?
Like other than books and comic books and all that
so
stuff.
actual like narcotic,
like real
alcohol,
stuff.
drugs.
Oh God. Well, okay. So 16 years old. Mind you, like I felt like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders as a kid, and I didn't know why. I was, like prone to depression, and it would just come on, and it would stay for weeks or a month. I just felt that way. I just felt different. I felt like I didn't belong, and everybody else was having a great time, and I wasn't.
What was your family like? Did you have I'm an only child with a single mom because my dad died of alcoholism when I was really young.
Yeah.
So did you have a big family or small family?
Small family. My whole family's from Boston, but my brother and I were born in Pittsburgh. And, my father wound up, he was on the teams that would go around the tri-state area and take apart and put back together power generators. So you go to the hydro plant, you go to the coal plant, you go to the nuclear plant, you take the generators apart, lay all the pieces out, clean them, and then put them back together. And I remember one time I was like, Dad, what if there's like one bolt that, was left over? He goes, you take it all apart again, and then you put it back all, like it had to be put together, obviously. Like this is like a huge, important job. And my father wound up moving up the ladder, and he wound up becoming a supervisor and a manager, a field manager for those teams. And he actually has an award. He's in the, basically he has like the Academy Award of people who do that.
Who
Right.
take apart generators.
Take apart power generators and make sure that they're cleaned properly and put back together, and that everything is done safely. And so, he was given a job in Pittsburgh, or given the opportunity to go to Pittsburgh. I think the other choice was like Alaska, if I'm not mistaken. He was like, all right, we'll go to Pittsburgh. And that was 1972. So we're talking about the Steelers. That was Franco Harris's rookie season. And that was when the Steelers actually went from the worst team in the league to the best.
Franco Harris was running back.
Big deal.
Yeah. Great.
Number 32.
So we had a really small yeah, I have his jersey in there. I can go grab it. He was an old friend of mine. God rest his soul. Yeah, he was like an uncle to me in a lot of ways. So I love Franco very much. Yeah. So my dad and my mother, they moved to Pittsburgh. They got married, moved to Pittsburgh. Had my brother and I. So it was very small. It was just me, and then my brother came along 4.5 years later, and so it was a small kind of unit. My parents got divorced when I was 14. And so, that's a pretty crucial age.
Yeah, especially you're going through adolescence, which is challenging and confusing enough.
Yeah.
And then to be dealing with a divorce. So, I mean, forgive me for stating the obvious, but do you think some of the depression had been there already, or did that exacerbate it?
I think it definitely exacerbated. Looking back, it was like I just kind of, I was a straight A student right up until that point, and then I just didn't see the point in studying anymore. And that was like looking back, that was like a tricky time. And I don't want to like wax histrionic on all of that, but I just think that it's I was looking back, that was like kind of tough right at that moment to go through all of that. And I think there was like this sense of feeling like I really felt alone, and I didn't feel like a part of, and then, you kind of fast forward a couple of years to age 16. I had a friend of mine call me one Friday night and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Nothing." And she would book like promotional jobs for this like modeling agency. And she's like, "Well, I had somebody drop out last minute, and can you come in and fill in for him?" And I said, "Sure. What do I have to do?" She said, "Just come down to our office, and if anybody asks, just say you're 21." I said, "Sure. Okay, great." So I had my mom drop me off, so I didn't have my driver's license, and I went into the office. There was this group of adults sitting there, and they looked at me and they said, "You're the guy?" I said, "Mm-hmm." They said, "How old are you?" And I said, 21. And they went, "Great, put this on." And it was a pirate suit, like with the ruffles and the cape and the hat and the wig and an eye patch.
So far, so good.
And little like fake booties that made your shoes look like they were boots. Mm-hmm. And I had a like a little plastic sword, and I had a pistola, like a little pistol, like a pirate pistol. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be Captain Morgan at a bunch of bars in Pittsburgh. And, and pardon me if this is an antiquated term for today's day and age, but this is the direct quote. They said, "These are your wenches." And there were these two hot college girls in like skimpy pirate girl outfits. And we all jumped in a minivan, and they drove us to a bar. And I'd never been in a bar. I'd never ordered a drink before in my life. And I went in there, and they said, "Hold on, we have to put your backpack on." And they put this backpack on that was a tank, and they filled it full of Captain Morgan's rum, and it had a tap on it. And they said, "Go get everybody drunk and give everybody T-shirts." So I went in the first bar, and the two college models were like, "Come on, come over here, let's drink this." So we went in the corner, and I'm squirting it in my mouth, squirting it in there. And then I gave people T-shirts, and I was very tentative and nervous, but I'm getting lit. And by like the third bar in, all that, depression, all that like weight of the world was gone. And I'm like in character. Okay, now I'm like, I am
you are Captain Morgan.
I am Captain Morgan. And I remember the third bar had those saloon doors, like the cowboy doors. And I just remember walking up, and I kicked the door in, and the doors flipped open, and all the adults looked at me, and I went, "Arg!" And the whole bar turned and went, "Arg!" And like it was on. And then I had everybody laying on top of the bar, and I was squirting in all of their mouths, squirting in mine. I was singing Marilyn Manson covers with the band, and Seagram's gave me a disposable camera to take pictures of the and I mean, the pictures that were on that thing were like crazy, like stuff going on in the bathroom. Yeah, I'm documenting this whole thing. I mean, it was crazy. And some guy offered me $30, I think, for the sword. And I was like, well, that guy offered me 40. Like, there's no other guy. Like, I'm just working up the price. All of a sudden, I'm this mastermind negotiator, and I sell the sword for $40, and then I sell the gun to another guy, and then I almost fell down the stairs because of the eye patch, because no depth perception. And so I got rid of that, and then I come back, and they're, "Where's your sword? Where's your gun?" I'm like, "Somebody stole it." I got this pocket full of cash, and I'm wasted, and you know what I mean? I'm having the time of my life. So they dropped me off on my mother's front lawn, and I kind of trundle in, and I sleep that night with one foot on the floor. The next morning, my friend calls me, and it's like, "Hey, how did the promotion go last night?" And I'm like, I thought it went very well. I thought we really reached some people. Being super professional. She goes, "Well, there's a huge problem." I'm like, "Shit, we're all going to jail. I don't know what you did last night, but Seagram's doesn't want to do the promotion unless you're Captain Morgan, so we need to get you a fake ID." And so there was another guy at the agency who was 10 years older than me, and he gave me his ID, which is unbeatable because it's a real ID, and I look just like him. And so you learn the zodiac sign and your date of birth, and you learn how to work that. And I was Captain Morgan from 16 through 21 in Pittsburgh.
And that was your introduction to drinking? Was that also your introduction to performing, like theater?
No, I started making my own movies. Like my creativity kind of went from drawing, painting, and game mastering, like tabletop role playing games, into making a movie is the same thing. I'm writing, I'm directing, I'm setting these things, the storyline up, I'm building it. So that was kind of the segue there. So, Captain Morgan was just, I was performance art.
And so then, okay, but that was your first drink, your introduction.
Yeah, those were my first drunks. You know, I think I'd been drunk at a cousin's wedding once before that, but like Captain Morgan was like, oh, wait a minute. I try to explain it to people who aren't addicts because it's hard to kind of, you know, because you hear people who aren't addicts say, well, he had kids. What? And I'm like, it doesn't care if you have kids.
Yeah.
You know, he was rich. You're like, right. Like you're so was Jim Morrison. You
I
know
mean,
what
that kept me from admitting I was an alcoholic for the longest time. I was like, oh, an alcoholic is clearly someone who's lost everything. And I was like, I've got a career. I'm on tour. I'm selling records. And I was like, oh, but I also am drinking 20 drinks a night. And I'm disappointed every morning that I'm still alive. I was like, maybe that's the problem.
Yeah.
So like, you know,
Yeah.
so it is, but it is very easy to look at the externalities, as we know, and say like, well, I can't have a problem because I'm doing okay by conventional cultural standards.
Well, and to the addict, all those kind of cerebral, I'm doing just fine. Excuse me. You know, that's the intellect trying to talk you out of what you need to do spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So
Yeah.
okay, so you've discovered the joys of alcohol. Did you like, for me, for example, I was a garbage head. Like drinking was my first vice.
Yeah.
But then eventually I realized I liked almost any drug that you put in front of me. So I was mainly an alcoholic, but also like anything, you know, like once I was drunk, I would do anything. Like one time doing a bag of the worst cocaine I found behind a toilet at Max Fish on Ludlow Street on a rainy Sunday night. So like garbage head.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I was, so mid 90s, drum and bass, Pittsburgh, first rave.
Diesel Boy.
Well, and at the time, I mean, if we kind of like, well, so it would have been like Diesel Boy, 187, Chris White, the Star Child. He went to Carnegie Mellon. He was a drum and bass DJ around Pittsburgh. And then I'm gonna just kind of deviate from drum and bass, and I'm gonna go Scott Henry.
Scott Henry from Baltimore, who had Fever.
Yep. Buzz.
Yeah. DJ, Scott was more of a progressive house DJ. Yeah.
He was great. DJ Blue, Bleau.
That one I don't know if I know.
Or Bleu.
I don't know if I
DJ Dimitri from Delight.
So Dimitri, one of the first most exciting musical moments I had as a electronic musician.
Yeah.
There was a record store in New York called Dance Tracks. It was on like 3rd Street, and I released my first single in 1990. And this was when Delight had Groove Is in the Heart. They were so big. And I went in there and they had a copy of my record. And Frankie Knuckles was in there. Frankie Knuckles, who literally invented house music. Like, without Frankie Knuckles, there's no house music. He was playing at a club in Chicago called The Warehouse. He was the person who first used the expression house music. So Frankie Knuckles, Dimitri, and Toa Tay, who was the other guy.
Kyoki?
Oh yeah, well, Kyoki and I, that
beef.
That would no beef, but boy did that. He and Michael Alleg.
Messiah.
I mean, I remember the band Messiah. Like,
do you remember Lords of Acid?
Yeah, first time I went to Los Angeles, I played with Lords of Acid and some other.
Oh my god!
But so I walk into this record store, and my first single is playing to Dimitri, Toa Tay, and Frankie Knuckles. I was like, I can quit now. Like, this is like. My career has reached its pinnacle. It's never going to be better than this.
Oh, but how fun. Like, you know, I think people don't understand, like, how it started out. There was no police security. There was no check-in line. There were no glow sticks. And you couldn't go to the store and buy Jenkos or baggy jeans. You had to go just buy a pair of jeans that were like 20 sizes too big for you. And get yourself a Ringer t-shirt. And people were starting to get their septums pierced. That was the first time. Dyed hair, you know, like, I mean, it was like a whole new style that was being built.
And that's such a fascinating aspect to it, is that everything was self-generated.
Yeah.
You know, there were no corporations, there were no companies. It was basically one kid sold the drugs, one kid DJ'd.
Somebody came back from Amsterdam with whatever they were selling. Acid was $5 a hit, which I was kind of, that was the segue into this, was like, the first time I took acid was at my first rave. And the rave got busted because it was kids with a power generator. You went into an abandoned building, you set up a power generator, and you went until the cops showed up. And the cops showed up very quickly. And I had just taken this $5 hit of acid. And we're like, what are we going to do? When's this thing going to hit? Where are we going to be? And somebody had the keys to a coffee shop called the Strip Bar, which was in the Strip District of Pittsburgh. And they went and opened it up, and everybody moved everything to there. So it was like, oh, it's moving to the Strip Bar, go. So we went down there, and I'm hanging out, and I go to my friend, I'm like, hey, man, I think it was like a dud. I'm not feeling anything. And he goes, oh, you want another one? I go, sure. I give him $5. So he comes back, I take the second one, and then I remember being in the kitchen talking. I remember I was talking to this girl in the kitchen, and there was a guy behind her just like doing this, and I'm like, is he okay? And she's like, oh yeah, he's on K. And that was my first time I ever saw somebody like in a K-hole. And I'm talking to her.
K, for people who are listening, is ketamine, which is an animal tranquilizer that became a very popular rave drug that really, for the most part, just led kids to sit on the dance floor. Like they just sit there and fall asleep.
It was like pre-GHB,
Yeah.
which then became very popular later. And but yeah, there wasn't like even ecstasy at that point. Like you'd heard about this thing from Amsterdam, but like it wasn't around. And once somebody smuggled back in their suitcase was gone, it was gone. So it was just like, it was kind of like acid marijuana, and like even drinking was discouraged at the raves that I went to, because that was like seen as like aggressive, and that's not what it was all about. It was about
also,
like unity.
Most of the people at the rave were 17 years old.
Right.
You know, so even if
that's
they'd
true.
wanted to drink, you know, it was easier to get Special K or acid than it was to get a can of beer.
Right. Completely. Yeah. So I remember talking to this girl, and I just was like, whew, man, it's getting hot in here. And I looked up at the pipes in the back of this coffee shop at the kitchen, and I could see the precipitation on the pipes. And I remember like a droplet fell off the pipe, and I tracked it all the way to the floor, which is black and white checkerboard, and it hit the checkerboard and went boom, and rippled out like it was made of water. And I was like, what? And I started sweat. It felt like sweat came out of every pore in my body. And then it was like, remember the old TVs when you would press off, it would go and click. It was like, and I was like, don't black out. And I just, like, the whole world disappeared. And then when I opened my eyes, like, it was like my body disappeared. I was this glowing ball, like a light, and I couldn't tell where I leaned up against the wall. My arm went into the wall, and I was like, I need to go. I'm gonna go listen to music. And I just went and sat on a speaker and danced for like the next 6 hours.
Wow.
That's
Anyway,
intense.
and I was kind of like, or you know, that experience for me, like I was like, it was having an 8 to 12 hour boxing match against my shadow, in which I won by decision in the 15th round. Do you know? And it was like this
A grudge match.
slugfest where I won by that much, and it was kind of like, all right, well, we did that, great.
You know, it's making me want to, because I also see that you have Carl Jung's Red Book on your table. And so you're just talking about a shadow self, and I really want to talk about that at some point, but I feel like we haven't gotten there quite yet.
Okay, fine.
So acid, rave culture, drinking, where did it go? When did it become a problem?
You know, I moved. I had success. I was very high functioning. You know, I went to a great school for acting. I went to Carnegie Mellon. I got a scholarship to one, you know, the best drama school in the country. And
I think this also, I just have to know, this is where Lindsay's going to get super excited, because she's also comes from the world of theater, like
Yeah.
I'm
Shakespearean
obsessed
theater.
with theater.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can talk theater. Yeah. You know, and so I think as I was having success, and then wound up like booking the first movie I auditioned for when I got to LA, which was Spider-Man. I just think that all of that then validates every part of you, but you don't, there's kind of lots of people along for the ride at that point, and that you should have gotten rid of a long time, meaning like personality traits. So, it's validating everything about me, and I don't know what should be validated and what shouldn't. So I just think, well, if it's working, then let's just ramp up everything. And, I really idolize those like tortured artists, and, I was smoking 2 packs of cigarettes at a time and drinking, and I just looked up to like those wild men like Gary Oldman, or even like I had this like Jim Morrison obsession.
And eat like Bukowski
and I really liked Rollins. I thought Rollins was like Bukowski, but in the gym to a certain degree,
And the interesting thing
Dry
about
rage.
Hank is, but I think he's always been straight edge.
Yeah. But there was some kind of, but yeah, I was into Bukowski, yeah, I was just into all those tortured artists, and I thought that, okay, that's what you need to be. It was all very cerebral. There was nothing in my body about me. It was like, you ever watch that show Dexter? Where he just sits there on the couch with the girlfriend, and he's like, what's normal? Like, you should put your arm around her. That's what normal people do. It was, my whole life was just, what do normal people do? How do you behave normally? And, of course, when I drank, it was like, I can be anybody. I can be the guy in the movie, the guy that I always want to be, that dynamic, outward living person. And I also chose a profession in acting where I could go put on a mask and I didn't have to be me either. And so I wasn't me on stage, and then when I got down off the stage, I went to the bar and drank and wasn't me. And which is sad, because again, it's like, well, what was my problem with reality? Like, I'm pretty good at reality. I just think that all of my success validated me, and it also validated the way that I drank or the way that I did drugs. And I think, as smart as I ever was, I really did think, if I can just get myself on a screen 30 feet high, everybody will be sorry for how they treated me. Everybody will, it'll somehow validate me in a way, and all my problems will go away. And as smart as I ever thought I was, I still somehow deep down inside believe that.
Because it felt great. Like, that's like, I remember at one point thinking to myself, like, okay, I don't need much. In order to be happy, all I need is to be eternally famous and have every person I know love me and validate me, and stay drunk and high every day for the rest of my life. Like, I'm not asking the universe for much, just those things.
Undying, eternal love and worship.
Yeah, I just need to be the most famous person
Yeah.
in the world and be validated by and loved by everyone, and then I'll be fine.
Then I'll be all right. Yeah, then I'll be okay. Then I'll be okay. Then I'll be okay. Implying I'm not okay. I'm not okay. And so luckily for me, in a weird way, I did have success right out of the gate. I got Spider-Man right out of the gate.
With Sam Raimi.
With Sam Raimi, yeah.
And I've never met Sam Raimi, but I'm so fascinated. But Sam Raimi? So Sam, I don't know. You know him, obviously.
He's great.
I don't, but like, what a fascinating weirdo.
Yeah.
He started the first Evil Dead.
Yeah.
And then the other Evil Deads, which are so unbelievably strange and inventive. And then that wonderful movie, Take Me to Hell, or Take...
Yeah.
And then he made Spider-Man. So he's made these very successful movies, but you can just tell there's something wonderfully, deeply strange about him.
Yeah, and also what I really loved about Sam was how concerned he was about the metaphor and the myth of a superhero story. Because, you see it playing out right now, and I don't want to harp on it, because I don't want to get started, because I'll start, I'll turn into get off my lawn guy. But it's like, you look at a lot of these superhero movies right now that are, they're being made by people who don't understand the power of mythology. And I don't know if that's an active takedown of, Western culture as, handed down by, Greek civilization, who are credited with the start of theater, or just the kind of Campbellian idea that it is all one story coming from the source as told by a thousand civilizations. But, you know, superheroes are supposed to be demigods and that are more human than human beings are, in order for us to talk about our own fallibility and our own kind of, you know, I think it takes the pressure off of people to be able to put the focus and criticism onto these larger than life characters who are either here to save you or here to understandably destroy everything you love, for good reason, or talk about jealousy, or like in True Blood to talk about marriage equality or racism or whatever all this is. You know, we can kind of project ourselves onto them, and that's when it works. And Sam was really concerned with the human aspect of Peter Parker. And I think that's why that movie is so beloved. That particular Spider-Man is so beloved because people really saw themselves in that character, and they understood what it was really about. And, you know, I think that Sam's, from my talks with him, he was always like, just very, like, I don't want to say myopic because that seems like, you know, but I mean, he was aggressively concerned with what is human about this story.
And as you mentioned, like representing like the Joseph Campbell myths and the archetypal aspects, like that actually, like the intelligence that he brought to that.
Yes.
Because the only reason I went to go see that movie was because he was making it. I was like, Sam Raimi's making a Spider-Man movie? What's he going to do with it? And I was like, oh, it's like beautiful and it's emotional and it's strong and powerful. Like it's really pretty special.
But we're also coming out of the 90s.
Yeah.
And to me, the 90s were a period where a lot of indie filmmakers and music video directors were given the reins to Hollywood and creativity. They were given big budgets. You have people like David Fincher. You have people like Tarantino. You have people like, even like Robert Rodriguez. And you know, I think Raimi was one of those too, where, you know, you have the dawn of HBO, which was a bunch of executives smart enough to say, you're way better at telling stories than any of us. Like, go do what you want to do, and we're going to support your vision. Go do something extraordinary.
I want to get back to sobriety and addiction, but one funny thing, when I first started coming to LA, I got invited, I don't remember his name, I got invited to dinner at the president of HBO's house.
Chris Albrecht?
I don't remember. This was quite a while ago.
Okay.
And this was my introduction to the world of like film and TV. He basically said, I hate this town. I hate the world of entertainment. He said, everything I approve, I'm trying to ruin the network. Yeah. But everything he approved was successful. He was like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm trying to approve things that no one wants to watch.
It's the producers.
But you know, but isn't that the antidote now? I see that happening now, where I kind of feel like I'm out in the water on a surfboard, and I feel like there's a huge wave coming in, and I'm trying to like understand what that wave is. And what I think is going to happen is that the big studios, the big places, the big companies of power are going to hire people who had problems with them in order to take over and fix how far they've gone astray.
But that would require risk, and all of them are terrified of risk.
Right. But they're going to get to a point where that's either going to happen, or you're going to see those creatives go to smaller companies that are going to allow them the creative freedom. And then these smaller companies, they're all going to start sprouting out.
Yeah.
You see it in tech first, and even like, you know, Nike and tennis shoes. Like, you're going to see a lot of cool shoes coming out from other places because all the creatives left, and they're going off to greener pastures where they can be creative. I think you're going to see it in entertainment as well.
So I like the trajectory that we're on, and I really like, I feel like we're at some point, like building towards this addiction, bottoming out, then recovery. There are many things about you that I think are really surprising. One is your ability to command jet planes to fly by with your mind.
Hold on. Okay,
But also, like, you're but basically like going to Carnegie Mellon for theater.
Yes.
And I know Lindsay was really.
But wait, I feel like we just got to LA in the story.
But do we want to go back and
Well,
talk about
do we have
theater?
to back up to go to Carnegie Mellon?
Well, I feel like we could talk about theater separately.
Carnegie Mellon.
Carnegie.
That's how you
Carnegie.
pronounce it if you're from
Yeah.
Pittsburgh. Carnegie.
How do they
Andrew
say it?
Carnegie.
Yep.
Why I slip into Carnegie. Carnegie Mellon. Carnegie Mellon.
Like Carnegie,
correct
like playing at Carnegie Hall.
Yes, Carnegie.
That's
Andrew
how that's how
Carnegie.
they say the hall.
Because he was Scottish.
Scottish.
So
yeah.
Oh.
Scott.
There you go. Well, but I feel like we're on the sobriety kick, and I feel like we're really there's momentum, and I don't want to break
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Because I'm working
Listen,
toward.
I'm
working,
ready. Whatever.
I'm in my mind.
Yeah.
I'm working towards a grand culmination that involves Carl
A
Jung.
grand conjunction. if you
Conjunction.
will.
Well, wait. Here's maybe an interesting way to go back
Okay.
to theater.
Yeah.
Get worried because it's going to get weird. Just kidding, it's not. I feel like you said something about you came out of the chute with some intensity, right? You did say the word shoot.
Figurative, literal. Yeah.
Would you have preferred me use another term?
No.
Yeah.
I think that's
Okay.
wonderful.
Fine.
But you said that you always had an intensity and that you always felt a little bit out of place.
Yeah.
But then two things happened, as I understand it. You got very involved in sports,
Yeah.
which I think a lot of people, when they are involved in sports, especially when they do multiple sports, there's kind of this this community and this belonging that happens within these kind of like sporting groups. But then you also
I think they're called
And
teams. I think they're called teams.
sporting groups.
Yeah, no, and that's true. No, I am definitely I listen. When I was in high school, I had friends. I had all kinds of different friends. I was friends with everybody, you know. But it's not to say that on the inside there isn't this like.
Of course.
deep
No, I think that's
sense
what's
of,
really
like, aloneness.
interesting.
Yeah.
Is that you have all of these communities, these probably tight knit athletic communities,
Yeah.
and yet you still are struggling with this feeling
Yeah.
that must have been powerful. But then you also find theater in all of this,
Yes.
and I wonder how
And D&D,
and D&D.
which is also very.
Well, and mostly other games. I played a lot of other games as a kid, so it wasn't necessarily D&D. Like, yeah, there was a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle role playing game that took place in modern day,
I would have played that.
and I have the original paintings. I have the
Michelangelo.
painting that is the first time the Ninja Turtles are painted in color. I'll show it to you.
What?
Yeah. No, I have. Yeah. You've come to the right place, my friend.
I was a big
Yes.
Ninja Turtles fan. That was something I actually was obsessed with.
I love the
was Ninja
black and
Turtles.
whites. But of course, it shows you what a weird kid I was. I like the existentialism. I like the revenge. I like the fact that at the end of the first issue, they've achieved their entire life goal of revenge. They've murdered Orokosaki and avenged the death of Splinter, the rat's master. And now it's, okay, well, we're these abominations. Where do we belong in this world, and what do we do? And then
I could cry.
That's what I like. But I was a weird kid.
But not that it's emotional. It's I think things that all people understand of like that feeling of where do I belong, which is I think another reason why I know that I really connected to it.
Yeah.
But it seems like you did too. So, but that also leads into addiction. I also think that my friends that are addicts, most of the addicts I know, have struggled with this deep existential feeling of what is a human? What does a human do?
Sure.
Am I supposed to be one, and am I doing it wrong, and I must be doing it wrong, and nothing makes sense, and I'm all alone?
Yeah, I get all of that. I mean, you know, I have theories. I have a theory as to why I felt the way that I did as a kid and how that's played out. You know, I'm Armenian. You know, this tattoo on my arm is actually Eastern Orthodox Armenian.
I've been trying to read it.
Yeah,
I
people,
was
people
like,
What is this?
I see
I was
people
like-
going like this. I was like, you're never going to read
is
it.
it like
You're
a
never gonna read it
is it like a
unless you-
Tolkien rune?
It's
Does it say serenity in Portuguese?
Yeah, it says Hereshtak, which is angel in Eastern Orthodox Armenian, and it's partially for my grandmother. So my great grandmother escaped the Armenian genocide, and you know the Turkish army came in and they killed all the men, killed her husband, and shot her And she laid on the ground and pretended she was dead while they murdered all of her children while she laid there. And there's like debate whether it was 7 children or 8 children that they killed. And then there was a baby that they left to starve to death in the crib. And when they left the house, she got up off the ground with the bullet in her and took the baby and strapped it on her back and took a piece of clothing from each one of the children, and she escaped. They were doing these death marches. They would chain the women and children together, because that's all who was left. They would chain the women and children together and like release the Kurds, who were the enemies of the Armenians. They release them and give them weapons and officers' coats and allow them to do whatever they wanted to these women and children. And it was awful, and women were dumping babies into tall grass because they weren't eating, and they couldn't support the baby, and they had to try to live on and survive. And anyway, as the story goes, my great-grandmother got to a river and strapped the baby on her back, swam the river, and then the baby drowned on the swim. So she got the other side, and that baby was dead. And so she wound up living in a cave in the mountains with a bunch of survivors. And I think the bullet wound got so bad that she had to come out, or and she was put into a relocation camp for anyone who survived until they figured out what they were going to do with them. And in this camp, as the story goes, again, there was this German officer who was stationed in Turkey at the time, and I think she worked in his house or something like that, and he impregnated her and then left her and went back to Germany. And we never knew who he was, but I knew that I was German, and I knew that I was Armenian because of that. And then my grandmother was born in that camp in Constantinople, and she was a blonde, skinny, blonde Armenian girl. And the Armenians, from my great-grandmother's village, they were very dark. They're not blonde. So she had this, obvious war baby that she gave birth to. And she referred to the baby as her angel. And to me, I think a lot of addicts, they struggle with spirituality or the idea of God. You look around in the world and even the way that you behaved when you were drinking, and you think, how could there be a God and I be allowed to act that way, or other people be allowed to act that way, or how could there be a Holocaust? How could there be a genocide in them? And her referring to the baby as the angel, to me, it said everything I needed to know about spirituality, in that, God didn't do this to the Armenians. Human beings did this because of whatever reason. That they're allowed to have free will, and humans are horrendous to each other and choose to fight each other and murder each other, but there is some sort of invisible world propping up the visible one. And my great-grandmother, believed in that power, and she would read that book backwards and forwards, and people say that she was a healer, that she had like energy, she had this like kind of metaphysical power to her. And she survived, and she credited it to this baby, this angel that was sent to her to get her through this difficulty. Not the baby is a burden that was born of whatever circumstances, we can all speculate what they were, but she saw it as a gift that allowed her to survive long enough to have my grandmother, who then died at age 40 of an autoimmune condition. So if you look at empirical data, like especially like in Jewish descendants of Holocaust survivors, or even Armenian genocide survivors, and there's a great doctor named Dr. Gabor Mate, who talks a lot about trauma and how that plays out through generations. The Armenian side of my family is riddled with autoimmune conditions, riddled with addiction. Mm. So I'm born, and I grow up feeling different, or feeling like there's this weight on my shoulders, and I don't know why, and I feel like I'm alone, or I feel like things don't make sense to me, and it's not random. It's not something that just was a dice roll I lost. This thing slid into me, and this thing also killed my grandmother at age 40. So, when you look at it that way, it's, going back to Campbell, in every hero's journey, there's a call to action, and the hero always refuses that call. And so me finding Captain Morgan was like all I needed to go off on the run. and run from that. And I just wanted to be stupid like everybody else. And I want to have a good time like everybody else. I want to go to spring break and I want to be an idiot. And at some point you get to this edge of the cliff and it's like, you're either going off this cliff to your death, or you're going to start walking it backwards, and you're going to start paying attention to the signs, and you're going to start, getting spiritual, trying to heal yourself, and then figuring out a way to grow. So, I think that getting into the arts, looking back, I maybe should have just gone into directing, because I think that's more what my personality is. But at the time, it was like being a rich, famous movie star. Who the hell wouldn't want that? That's what I thought in my brain. But it was developing storytelling in order to kind of get to the place where I am now, after 40, where I get to tell the story for my family members that didn't get to tell their story. So I really do feel like that's my place in all of this. And so, figuring out a better way to do that, or figuring out how to use all of that.
I feel like when I go back to Texas, or when I the very thought of generational trauma would shut a room down. I mean, that would be the end. No more. Like, we're not talking about this. This is not what we're doing. But now I feel like there's so many people that are getting into this place of, like, if you don't call out the idea of generational trauma, whatever it may have been, it's like, how do you not continue the cycle?
You have to be responsible for a lot of things you're not responsible for. Like, no one ever says, oh, well, that guy's an asshole, but he's an alcoholic, so he gets no, it's like, you're just an asshole, and it doesn't, and like, I am not using the phrase generational trauma as some sort of excuse for behavior whatsoever. In fact, to me, it's like I said, in the, when I'm talking to my buddy, talking to Joe, every once in a while in a family tree, an artist comes along, and they're going to talk about all this stuff, and they're going to process it all into a digestible format for other people. And so then you go, well, what am I doing? Am I trying to wake people up here, or but I got asked to speak in New York at this this Armenian event for the Children of Armenia Fund, and my speech was about that, because regardless of what anybody's going to admit to or not admit to, in terms of the Armenian genocide, we all have to move on. And it's really hard, especially with like what's going on in Artsakh right now. It's like very difficult because it's just drumming all of this up again. And, but we have to turn to spirituality. I think it's a time in the world, and Jung talked about this back in the 30s, where, technology was increasing at this exponential level, and he theorized that if we didn't increase morality at the same rate, we were going to get into big trouble. And I think that technology jumped morality, but I think the scales are now flipping back, and I think that there is a lot of talk and return, which is why I think psychedelics are making a big comeback, is that I think the scales are kind of evening out. That there's been this kind of cerebral approach to try to kind of conquer the world. But in doing so, we've kind of negated our own, kind of, I don't know, like, connection to the earth. As I'm getting very heady right now, but I just think that
I also want, like I said, I've got my sort of like my
red book
roadmap
there,
in my
yeah.
head, and I keep looking at the red book, and because there's also the sort of the geographic aspect of where I'd like to get to, which is Carl Jung and Bill Wilson and Aldous Huxley.
Oh God, yeah.
So, okay, so not to try and be pedantic or pedestrian or something else that starts with PED.
Did you do really well on the SAT verbal?
I did much better on the SAT verbal than the math.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I could see that. You used insouciant in an interview once, and I was like, oh my God.
Insouciant.
Yeah.
Sort of carefree,
But
careless.
I remember this interview where you used it, and I went and got a dictionary
Yeah.
before we had phones. I was like, oh.
And okay, so you're, correct me if I'm wrong, you're in Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
you're living the life of a tortured drunk.
Drunken sailor. Yes.
Yeah, drunken
No.
sailor, but you're also like having career success
A little bit.
and the world is validating you.
A little bit. I had enough to not wind up dead.
Yeah. And where were you living at this point? And where, like, in terms of going out and looking for trouble, where were you doing that?
Well, back in the day before cell phone cameras, everybody went out every night. I mean, everybody went
In
out
Los
every night.
Angeles.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you come to L.A. and it was like,
And
you
so-
know, that was like in the wake of Swingers, you know, the movie Swingers.
Oh, yeah.
And it was kind of like...
You mentioned Vince Vaughn earlier.
Vince is a friend,
Yeah.
yeah. And, you know, but also like we're not that far removed from the Sunset Strip. So there's still like fun to be had and no one's out there filming you and there aren't really forums and blogs to then like
Talk about
blow
every
up.
single,
Yeah.
Yeah, and there wasn't like a book market for women who are out there with guys, you know, like trying to get that, you know, which you know is kind of I hear from my friends that it's rampant.
It is
And-
one of the things I'm grateful. Well, I'm grateful for the fact that when I was out drinking and doing drugs, it was sort of before social media,
Right.
Sort of before camera phones, before Uber, and before fentanyl.
Oh god. Yeah,
Like,
right.
So okay, so you're in Los Angeles, going out every night. Where were,
Yeah.
were you more? This is my own like taxonomical approach to addiction. Like, as we know, like there's some people who stayed at home and drank. There's some people like me who loved
Yeah.
drinking anywhere, but I loved dive bars. Like
Oh,
I was,
man,
I was a
love
scumbag.
dive bars.
Like,
There was
yeah.
a place called the White Pony, which was on Western and Sunset, like around there. Mm-hmm. It's run by this Hungarian woman named Vicky, and she would make you hot dogs while you drank. Like she would like feed you like a mom, mm-hmm. and she would get you a drink. Oh, here, have a hot dog, honey. You know, and like, you should meet my daughter. And I'm like, oh, okay, you know. And I love a great jukebox. I'm a
Yeah.
huge music head, so I would get in there early, monopolize the jukebox.
Because there was a place in New York that was my favorite. It was called, there was Mars, the club where I used to DJ, but there's a place called Mars Bar. Mm-hmm. It was
That was very, very, very tiny.
tiny.
Like
yeah.
literally that far apart.
It's so
I used
small.
to go there.
Yeah, and so it was like ex-cons hung out there,
Yeah.
strippers, prostitutes. Like it was basically a Lou Reed song.
I saw a guy put a nail this long into his nose at the Mars bar
Yeah.
once.
Love it. I've thought about what to do for my 50th birthday, and I kind of want to do like a Jim Rose sideshow circus.
That's such
kinda
a good
thing.
idea.
I mean, we'll talk.
Okay.
But
So setting the scene. So it's the 90s. You're
yeah.
drinking. You're out there smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. When did you start to realize you had a problem? And what's your sobriety date, if you don't mind me asking?
Sure. No, listen, I knew I had a problem the whole time. We used to joke about being alcoholics. You know, we were maniacs. We knew it. I knew it. But it was kind of like joking. And I was so wrapped up in the romanticism of it all. And I, you know, even though the ship's going down, you're like, there's no way. We're gonna get to England. We're gonna go across the Atlantic, right? This is fine. You know, it's just a little hole. And my sobriety date is August 26, 2002. So that was day
wow.
one, August 6th. You know.
So this is 22 years.
This will be 20. I'm like 21 and a half as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, look, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, getting sober was, like I said, it was waking up to the fact that something needed to change. And what needs to change? Everything. You know, in a lot of ways, not unlike what my father did for a profession, except I had to do it to myself. I had to then take apart the entire generator, put all the pieces out, clean every single one of them, and then put them back together. And if there was one thing out of place, I had to take it all apart again and put it back together. And then I had to go hire people, or I had to go meet people and search out people that could help me then build a better generator or a cleaner way of producing energy. You know, I mean, it just became this kind of lifelong search. And so yeah, you jump off, you go, okay, this has to end. I'm hurting myself. I'm hurting others. I can't do this anymore. And I have to wake up. And then, you travel the world and you meet some really, really interesting people, have a lot of really interesting things to say. And, the genealogy of it all, and following my family tree and having a conversation with Dr. Gabor Mate about how the Armenian thing kind of played out and how that affected alcoholism and just overall health in my family. And that helps you see things, and then you start talking about those things. And before you know it, all of a sudden it's like, I always relate it to wearing glasses. I wear really thick glasses. Like my eyes are so bad I can't get corrective eye surgery, so I'm wearing contacts right
you
now.
guys can
me
share
too.
glasses.
It's horrible. So I wake up and I'm blind. And even when I think back to being a little kid, it's like I didn't want to go play catch, because I think looking back, it's like I couldn't see and I don't want something whizzing at my face. And so, I had that kind of sense, I think, to my own self-image. Like I just didn't know who I was until, you start unraveling these things. And yeah, kind of like sobriety is the jump off place, but then it's like all of these dominoes start falling into place, and the picture keeps getting clearer and clearer. Like when you go to the eye doctor and they go A or B, and you go B, and they go A or B, A, and they keep clearer. I'm kind of like in this crazy, like accelerated version of that.
And did you get sober once and that's it, or was it?
Yeah, I mean, I skidded for like a summer because I was like, "There's no way I'm going to, I'm not. This isn't for me. Like this can't be right. I'll figure this out." And I'd like kind of get like 28, 29 days under my belt, and then it's 4th of July, and there's a party, and what am I gonna do? And then like right back to zero, less than zero. There were bar fights. There was like crazy stuff that went on. I thought I lost an eye at one point, and
were the
real
hangovers,
alley
were the
cat
hangovers
stuff.
really bad?
I mean, well, then there was also Blue Mondays, because once electronic. Well, God, if I could have just stayed with drum and bass and house music, everything would have been okay. But it
Just stayed with acid, everything would have been fine.
it moved into progressive trance.
Oh yeah.
Which, nothing like having a, sweaty grown man fanning you with a giant piece of cardboard while rubbing Vicks Vapor Rub into your temples.
So Vicks Vapor Rub, the smell of Rave, maybe not now, but for the longest time, the smell of Rave was the smell of Vicks Vapor Rub.
But why?
It brought on the sensation of ecstasy and everything. Like it made your skin tingle.
Ecstasy. And that sound, that wham, 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 like that all day. Sit on the speaker and just listen to that wham. Azito de Bass, Doom's Night. I mean, I still listen to it. Or Heaven Sent by Digweed, Bedrock. Like some of those songs, when they play, I'm like, ugh, my jaw starts grinding.
Yeah.
But that got me right to where I always, that was it. It was like, once you find that thing that makes you feel the way you want to feel, it's like I was saying before, or about to say before, it's like when you explain it to a quote unquote normie, a non-addict, it's like, look, you'll never understand it because you don't know what it's like to like feel like you had a headache your entire life. And then someone hands you aspirin in the form of Captain Morgan rum or acid or ecstasy or cocaine, whatever it is. And you take that thing, and the headache goes away.
Not just your headache, but the world's headache.
Yes, you love the world. You feel it's a spiritual experience, which is what Jung said to Bill Wilson, which is, in one of his letters. I'm paraphrasing, but it was something in the gist of like, all addicts are looking for a spiritual experience.
So this is now we're getting.
Yeah. Did you like my segue?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you for taking us there. So I also think it's really interesting. You mentioned the White Pony on Sunset and Western, but that's like right down the hill from where Carl Jung used to speak in Beechwood Canyon.
Oh.
It's also right down the hill from where Aldous Huxley lived.
Wow.
And as we know, Aldous Huxley became friends with Bill Wilson and Lois Wilson.
Huxley had it right. Everybody looked to Orwell. because I think the Soviet Union, we're talking about like kind of the repression of human beings and that whole experiment as it played out in communist Russia. Everybody was so focused on, I guess, like the kind of the Soviet version of like human control, and that like books would be banned and that would be the end of civilization. But then, once you hit 1985 and 84 really didn't go that way. And I think the world that we're living in today is a world of Huxley.
Much more so, yeah.
It's it's not that people aren't going to read books because books are banned. People aren't going to read books because they've got everything else they want and need. Like, we're so inundated with comfort that you wouldn't want to read a book because you have all this other stuff.
It's too challenging, yeah.
Yeah, like we're now, like they figured it out. It was like AI unleashed on human beings in the form of social media is just like, it went right to the gooey center of humans. And it's like,
yeah,
we know what you like. We know how to feed you. We're going to give you so much of what you like that you're going to stop producing. I mean, it's Huxley's world. It's Brave New World.
And yeah, so Bill
anyway,
Wilson.
Sorry, I digress.
Oh no, I think you didn't. It's actually like a really relevant and completely fascinating, because it also is that search for comfort, the search for, and like it. Maybe there's a search for meaning as well, but we have been reduced to this species of like the sole criteria for evaluating our place in the world is, how do I feel?
Right.
And one of the things I was really fascinated to talk about, and to talk about more later, is the spiritual aspect of sobriety. Because, for example, I don't know what your guys' experience was, but when I got sober, I was like, okay, I'm walking into a room, and this means I stop drinking, and I hang out with sad alcoholics, and like...
There's the old guy in the trench coat in the church basement.
And there's like the
what am I
cool,
doing here?
like the sober bartender with tattoos. So at least it's kind of cool and there's stuff to look at. But I didn't know when I got sober that there was a spiritual component. And it was such a fascinating, the most wonderful bait and switch. Like, you go in to get sober and you end up with this unbelievably expanded spiritual life and awareness. Like, so much so that, like, when I got involved in the 12 steps, like, the only step that involves addiction is the first one.
It's the only one that mentions alcohol. And there's like 700 different 12-step groups, and they just switched out that first step signifier. And and I try to explain that to people, and it's also like, people trip up over the God thing, and it's like, look, just, if you think you know what God is,
go with that.
Right.
Like,
I'm going to tell you, you're probably wrong. I mean, like the idea of saying, like, I mean, Campbell thought it was so ridiculous that a human being would think that they could even fathom what God is.
Well, so you've hit on one of my favorite moments in sobriety. When I was doing the 12 steps, and Linz, I think we've talked about this, the third step made a decision to turn our life and will over to the care of God as we understood God. And I wrestled with this, and I wrestled with it. And eventually I had the most wonderful realization, which is the God of my understanding is a God that I could never understand.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that's the answer. Like,
well, and I've gotten to this place, which again is my own intellect trying to explain, but like, just the idea that God doesn't know what God is. God is using us to try to understand what it is. That it's this amorphous source, and it has to take physical form in order for it to go, oh, that's what it is?
So it's funny you say that, because I've had this sort of odd theory about humans or biological life in general. And Linz, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, because it's just a theory. I don't even know if I believe it. But basically, I think that the universe has no physical form. I think the universe exists on dimensions we can't conceive of. Yes. It's not bound by time. It's not bound by gravity. But what the universe has done is broken off pieces of itself and given it physical form so that we can go back into the universe and teach the universe our experience.
Well, it's to me, that's the only way, again, being Armenian, it's the only, being Armenian, being African, being German, being Welsh, whatever it all is, the history of the world. It's the only way that I can possibly fathom a non-interference clause. Because if there was this benevolent, all-powerful thing, why would it allow this to go on? There has to be some sort of non-interference, which then lends itself to free will, or kind of this free will experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, whatever. The double helix lands and grows, and and then it ends, and then another one lands somewhere else, and let's go watch that show.
Yeah, and the tardigrades move to a different planet.
Yeah.
As we start to get towards the end of our conversation, there's one thing you said earlier that tied back to good old Carl Jung here, which is the shadow self. You talked about like taking acid and going like 15 rounds with your shadow.
Yeah.
And it made me think, so during the pandemic, I went back and reread a lot of like philosophy that I had read when I was at college. And I went back and reread some Jung. And I was reacquainted with that concept of the shadow self in the most fascinating way. Because when I was growing up, I thought the shadow self was Nine Inch Nails. I thought the shadow self was like angry, dark, vicious, like the tough, the murderous id. And then at some point I realized my shadow is simply awkward. My shadow is the part of me that I don't want to look at, but it's not the dark part, it's not the dangerous part, it's the uncomfortable part. It's the vulnerable part. And I don't know if that resonates with either of you, because I think that the Jungian idea of a shadow self has been seen to be this sort of like this dark lord as opposed to the uncomfortable self.
Well, I think there's something darker than anger, which is I've thought of it recently as like the shadow part of me is the part that disconnects, that doesn't want to connect with the world outside of me, and then that lighter part, the part that I enjoy more, is the part that wants to be a part of the world around me.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, well, the thing that I think I wrestle with is, this idea of victimhood, or a perception of being a victim, which I think is very attractive. But I think that once you are a victim in any way, shape, or form, justifiably so, that then bleeds out and permeates into every single part of your life. And that's the thing that I need to keep in that cage, because there's a bit of it that like wants me to disconnect from my feelings. And the idea is like I have to feel my feelings in order to process them, which I've gotten a lot better at. Again, we're talking about like feelings and how you feel and kind of that Huxley kind of thing, but to me, it's been this real balancing act to, understanding that things are to be overcome. And I had a teacher at Carnegie Mellon named Victoria Santa Cruz, who was a Peruvian woman who was like kind of world renowned. Mm-hmm. She was like this national treasure, and she used to spout all sorts of like amazing, amazingly, wise things. And she tried to instill in all of us this kind of sense of self-discovery, like to disconnect from the head, and the word incorporate, the cuerpo, the body. You have to incorporate in the body, so disconnect your head, and it's here in the feeling and life. And she would say things like, she'd say, "Okay, kid." She would inevitably give you these exercises to do, and when you screwed up the choreography, you would know why, and it would tell you everything you needed to know about yourself. And so it was almost like a class where you would come into confrontation with the shadow, or the thing, that little gremlin inside of you that's flipping switches. And she would say this thing like, she'd say, "Okay, kid, the moment you say I did it is the moment the devil walks in the door. Okay." And as a performer, like I've had those moments on stage where like I nailed that moment so fully, I was so present and so rich on stage that I don't even know what the hell is coming next, and I don't even know what my line is, you know, and now you're out.
Yeah.
You know, and so for me, I think it's this real struggle to kind of keep that balance where you know, I don't let that ego, that maniacal dictator waiting to happen, that's waiting to get power so that it can hold, you know, I can be right so someone else can be wrong. You know, it's like, no, like, it doesn't matter. You know, it doesn't, not to get depressed in the fact that, I think it was your words, the world is 14 billion years old and we're going to live a few decades, and that it's just too much for anyone to bear. Not going fully into that, but also like just kind of like I'm just gonna try to be human, where I think I ran from being human for so long and I don't know why, you know. And
well, humanity is messy. Humanity is vulnerable. That's one of the things when I go to 12-step meetings, like I'll be sitting there and my immediate reaction is to be kind of scared, like, everybody here knows more than I do. Everybody here is cooler than I am. Everybody here is better looking than I am. Like they're all like the cool kids, and I'm going to have to sit here in the back and like hope they don't notice me. And then I remember, okay, I'm in a 12-step meeting. Every single person here has experienced the true dark night of the soul multiple times.
yeah.
And it's sometimes being reminded of that shared humanity. Like, and it's easy in a 12-step meeting to be like, oh, everybody here has cried themselves to sleep.
Nobody got there on a winning streak.
Yeah. Like things are great. I'm going to go sit in a church basement with a bunch of homeless guys.
On Friday night while my friends are out. Yeah, no.
So it's that reminder that the human condition, I mean, certainly, and I don't mean this as an expression of privilege, but like the human condition affects all humans. Yeah. You know, and certainly there's
somebody in a group saying, oh, here comes that rock star guy who had that huge video that I love and sold millions and millions of albums, and you know what I mean? Like, and you know, everybody has their own trip.
And so it's just that reminding ourselves that like the human condition, like we're all struggling. Like everybody deals with illness, everybody deals with loss, everybody deals with questions of meaning and significance.
And that's, I mean, that's what to me is the dark part of social media, for example, is that people can kind of live in anonymity and really sit behind a keyboard and kind of like discount the fact that everybody's going through something or that everyone has feelings, no matter who you are.
And to present such a selective, edited version of yourself.
But also, like, I think, you know, I think society, I think religion, I think, you know, large organizations have real trouble with nuance. It's like, I mean, which leads you to, well, you're not a nerd and you are, and you're this or you're that. And it's like, right, but as soon as I open my mouth, it's a different, you know, and you just, which is why sometimes people are like, well, I'm sorry, I've never seen anything you've been in. I don't know who you are, you know, whatever. And I'm like, I don't care. In fact, I like it better when you don't, because then you can actually get to know me, or we can talk without some sort of manicured. You can hide out on social media for decades if you want. You know, it's like a bad relationship, like where you can just hide all those parts of yourself, which is like kind of antithetical. We're talking about like going out to clubs in like the late 90s, 2000s, and it's like before cell phone cameras and social media and blogging and things like that. And it's like you actually had to go see someone in the wild and go and talk to them and then hang out with them and get their vibe and see how your energy mixed.
The good old days when you couldn't Google someone. You
right. Yeah.
I miss it. But it also makes people, I think, afraid of how they are perceived on so many levels. And there's this fear of judgment, because it's not just the person in the room that's experiencing you. It's people you don't know, unknown faces from anywhere could find you on a Google search and go to your Instagram and see your personal life. And I think that there's that does something to a human soul when you are constantly considering your own perception
Yeah.
or how you're perceived.
That's why Bubbles has the right idea.
Yeah, kind of. That's it.
So again, so we've taken up. Oh, poor Bubbles.
Bubbles,
She's
what are you
growling.
arguing about? What are you
She's just,
grumpy?
she's just mad.
Sleeping?
She's mad at social media.
She doesn't.
Yeah,
like
she's
it.
been reading those
That's why
comments.
she doesn't have her own profile.
Yeah.
She's not concerned.
Good for her.
So there's one. I mean, okay. As we start to wrap up, there's one thing I've noticed. Well, many things I've noticed while I've been sitting here, but one is skulls. And so it's fascinating to me because we're talking about honesty. We're talking like a degree of sort of like getting a spiritual life where you're honest, where you're seen. And it's been so interesting seeing skulls everywhere. Because sometimes skulls are seen as tough, but they're also a reminder and there's an honesty. So I'm curious to know like why you have surrounded yourself with all these artistic representations of skulls.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, some people like carpe diem as a mantra or a motto, and the flip side of that is memento mori. You know, someday it's all going to be gone, and so I think it is a reminder of that. To me,
I think memento mori is a Latin for remembrance of death, reminder of death.
Remember, we all must die.
Yeah.
You know? And there's actually a couple of pieces in here that are actually titled Memento Mori that I bought because they were called, you know, so I've kind of like collected a few of them. But, you know, I don't know. I just think that death is not the worst thing that can happen. My great grandmother, my Armenian great grandmother, she used to say, I guess in Orthodox Armenian, fear God. You have to fear God. And I don't think it's to fear this Old Testament God that's going to like kill you in an earthquake or something. I think it was more about fearing unrealized potential, fearing straying from the path that is presented to you, fearing a life unrealized. Once you wake up, you cannot go back to sleep. So it just becomes this march towards this inevitability. And so I think once you know that the skull is at the finish line waiting for you, then I think there's a perspective to life that I think makes it easier for me to live under, which is like, okay, well, what are we doing today? Or, you know, what's the story we're going to tell today? And also, I think it takes off some of the pressure. Because it's like, I mean, listen, like, unless you are, you know, Oppenheimer or you discovered the double helix, you know, like, you're going to be a footnote. Like, no one's ever going to remember you, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So whatever you think you're going through or whatever you think you did is not a big deal. And even if you did something extraordinary, it was probably some internal antenna raised up that got beamed into you, which you can't even take credit for anyway. You know, artistically or you know, scientifically, whatever. I mean, so once you get that, it's like, okay, the pressure's off. You know, and it's like, you know, what kills the ego more than taking a nap? You know, or going to sleep. It's like, just let it go. You know, and but also at the same time, like, try to do something useful. You know, or try to understand your place in this thing, or understand that it's just this constant search, and you know.
I love what you just said. There's one other aspect to that I try and remind myself. Well, first off, the fact that for 3.5 billion years, everything that's been alive has died.
Yeah.
So it's hard to take it too personally.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, imagine if only 10% of humans died.
Yeah.
Then you could be like, oh, what a shame I died. But the fact that it's every biological thing that has ever lived has died. And but the other thing I try to remind myself of, that's hard because I am kind of selfish and solipsistic, is remembering like the confusion that the other 9 billion people have around mortality, around significance, around fear. Like looking at it's so easy for me to look at the world and be like, to judge them. to judge other people, to sit in a place of like even like sort of hostility and contempt, but then remind myself like, oh, existence is terrifying, and everyone's struggling through it. Very few people, I think, get to the place where hope we might be approaching, which is context and recognition. Looking at a skull and being like, yep, that could be Hitler, that could be Gandhi, that could be MLK Jr., that could be Napoleon, that could be whomever.
Well, and the realization that those people you mentioned were products of the time they were born in the place that they were born. I'm German, so are we not going to talk about?
To be
what
fair,
it
you're
means?
kind of everything.
Kind of everything, but that's
Yeah.
the point. Is that I'm victim and perpetrator on both sides, all the way back. And so, does that mean we shouldn't talk about it? Does that mean if I talk about it, I could be accused of being something that my ancestors were? I mean, sure, I'm German. My roommate in college is a famous Jewish cantor. What does that have to do with anything? And to me, that's the clue that tells me that, like, it is about talking about, what people were going through at certain times, or what was going on in the world at times, which is why I love history, and I think I've always been drawn to that. But it's an exploration of the human experience while we're down here, because we're going to be gone, and what happens? Like, everything we've learned gets transmitted back to some database, and then we move on to the next thing. I mean, I don't know.
The wonderful liberation of not knowing.
Yeah. And I'm totally cool with that. There was a great 1968 interview with Stanley Kubrick in Playboy. He was saying that at the end of it, because they were talking about 2001 and how it was like this, kind of him, I guess, like questioning his own mortality or questioning the universe and his place in it, and kind of like the journey into outer space was actually the journey inward, and so they were talking to him about his thoughts on religion and spirituality, and at the end of it, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something to the effect of like, the scariest concepts for a human being is the fact that God is impartial. That's a scary idea, but I think once you can get past that, well, now you can really start living. And I think that the skull is my reminder of that.
Constant memento mori.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to wrap up because I feel like we've been monopolizing your time for far too long. And
I mean, I could talk about this stuff forever.
Well,
so thank
we
you.
can.
This is a great excuse.
And also, we have a nice meeting later to keep
we're going to talk about some mythology
Yeah.
and symbology.
Let's end. So I don't. You mentioned that.
Good plug.
in
That
the
was a
text.
really
You like
solid
that?
plug.
That
Yeah.
was a good segue.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the text, and can you? Do you have to go to an island to?
Is it like a Naked and Afraid game show?
Do they drop you in a
Kinda.
swamp and you get to like ride alligators?
You are there's 13 guests that are invited to a depraved billionaire's
Really?
jungle island.
For real?
Yes, and he is in search of
So it's like the island of
they're
Dr.
in search of it's like
The
a
island of Dr. Men.
Is he gonna hunt? Does he hunt them?
most dangerous game.
Yeah.
Well, the banker is in search of their equal, and so there is $200 million split into briefcases that are hidden all over the island, and there is a series of competitions between the guests to try to find the highest value cases that will then be put on a board that night in a jungle temple in a game of Deal or No Deal. And you can be eliminated by the banker and be kicked off the island, or you can survive, and whatever money you win then goes into a cumulative pot that then the final contestant will play for in the final episode.
Only
and it's
one
like an
person?
ungodly amount of money. It's
Wow.
like life change, like crazy
So
amount of money.
the finance part of me is like, how in the world does a network make $200 million back?
I'm trying to figure out where that money comes. There are all of these policies in place and things like that, because there's not a set amount in the final game. Like, it could fluctuate, and it could fluctuate by a lot. And so that was a lot of the fun of the game, was seeing.
And where did you guys make it?
We made it on a remote jungle island.
Oh, a remote jungle island.
Yes.
Whoa, I've
Okay.
always wanted to go there.
Okay, so wait, so I like, because this sounds fascinating. I don't know much about the world of game. Is it a game show?
Well,
Would you call it a game show or is it
it a reality
t-
competition series.
Okay.
But there's a social aspect to it.
Can they make teams between each other?
Yeah, and
alliances?
Like, there at one point, I'm not going to get too much, but there was a 20-minute screaming match where I'm just standing there watching people scream at each other in a giant 100-foot jungle tree. It sounded like a thunderbolt. About 50 yards away from us, just crack. We turn, and this huge tree just goes down in the jungle, like 50 yards from where we were shooting, and just all the debris flies up.
That's your fault. You did it with your mind.
I think they were
like
doing
how-
what they're screaming, and then they screamed at each other for another 5 minutes. I mean, it was like it goes like I
It's
couldn't
drama.
believe it. Yeah, there are people. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of people playing for very personal things, family members, or whatever all these things are. That they are playing for. Like they are playing to try to change their life, and it gets intense and fun.
Okay, so we should. The sun is setting over beautiful Southern California. The air is coming in off the ocean.
Yep.
It's nice.
Smells delightful. So, Joe, thank you for having us over, and thank you.
coming over.
This was really wonderful, and I'm glad Bubbles didn't kill anyone yet. So, like, we're gonna turn off the camera, so like then Bubbles will be free to go on her murderous
She's gonna go.
rampage. So that was our conversation with Joe Manganiello, who might also be pronounced Joe Manganiello. We don't fully know. So you say Manganiello, I say Manganiello.
Tomato. But also, I hope that everyone enjoyed that conversation with Joe as much as I think we did. It went to places that I couldn't have guessed it would go to. And I feel like it was a joy for me to sit between two dudes just connecting.
I mean, am I really a dude by comparison? Like, I feel like
I think you have a doodliness to you.
But, I mean, here's the thing. It's like, it's the equivalent of going to a dog park. A dog park where all the dogs are running around, and you have, like, this, I don't know what it would be, like this muscly Rottweiler who's just strong and is at the, the apex of the dog hierarchy. And then over in the corner, that's Joe. And then over in the corner, there's me, like a dog with like sort of like splotchy fur who probably smells not great and occasionally walks into things. And like you throw a tennis ball for it and like accidentally the tennis ball hits the dog on the head and the dog falls over. Like that's me. Like
Yeah, but
tiny-
then you give them a dog puzzle and then the dogs work it out together. And I felt like I was between two dogs figuring
Okay.
out a dog puzzle
But
together.
I do sometimes when I'm in the presence of like I met an Army Ranger once who was like this similar, like he had been like in war and knew how to be an Army Ranger. And I was like, how do I even consider myself a man in the presence of someone like that? And I felt that way with Joe as well. Like I should just sort of like leave my man status at the door. And I was just like, as I said before, like the slow little dog who gets hit in the head with tennis balls.
No. I feel like you guys, you've been through a lot of similar stuff together, raves, getting sober, staying sober, and also you're both really, really smart, curious people. And I found it to be so fun and fascinating to be in a conversation with both of you. And it was really fun for me personally.
Okay.
Just to
Great.
hear y'all talking.
So we'll wrap up because we've been talking a lot.
Yeah, we've talked so much.
And just in closing, before we say our thank yous, I wanted to just mention that I do have my tour coming up in September.
So if you're in Europe or want to be in Europe,
6 dates, I
Get
believe
ready.
they've all been announced. And yeah, and once again, the only way I would agree to do the tour is that I end up with no profits. That's weird, isn't it? Like a friend of mine sort of struck or texted me and she was like, wait, you're touring but at the end of the tour, you will have less money than you started out with. I was like, I don't know, it makes sense to me, but I guess it's a little strange.
It's definitely curious. I mean, but also if you are in a position where that is something you can do, I think there are a lot of people that are also in the position to be able to do something like that, and they just don't. But you are, and you choose to do something with it that is meaningful and could really, really help organizations who are trying to do good things for the world.
And also something I just keep coming up against is not coming up against in a bad way, but it is kind of a bad way, is the importance of saving animals for me. It's more important than anything else. You know, especially the enormity of animal suffering and how innocent animals are. Mm-hmm. Like if I can do anything or take any step to help them and help alleviate suffering, I sort of feel like I have to do that. Like it's such a simple binary ethical choice. Like either the choice that helps animals or a choice that's indifferent to animal suffering or harms animals. Like, well, you want to help animals. How can you not make that choice?
I think once you have allowed the understanding of the amount of suffering that these animals endure, but also what it does to people, what it does to other animals, what it does to our planet, what it does to our oceans, mm-hmm. It's like, how do you not, given the opportunity to do something, how can you not? But a lot of people just don't. And so I think it's really beautiful that you do. And I hope that people are, I am inspired by it. I hope that other people are inspired by that generosity that you have.
Well, thanks. Okay, so now do you want to say, speaking of thanks, do you want to say thanks?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to. First of all, I want to say thank you to Bagel, who was not present for our interview, but was there in spirit. Mm-hmm. And I also want to say thank you to Bubbles for being a wonderful bodyguard to Joe. And
allowing us to spend time with Joe.
She let us be in her space, and I'm endlessly grateful. And thank you to Joe. I mean, Joe let us into his home. He gave us all sodas and was just so kind to the crew and to us, and Joe, so thank you to Joe.
Oh, and also Joe has a really interesting TV show, doesn't he? Have Deal or No Deal on an island in the tropics.
Deal or No Deal Island, which we'll link to in the show notes. Yeah. The information on that one, which it seems like a very, very fun thing, and Joe obviously loves games and overseeing games like that. I mean, he's the mm-hmm. dungeon master at his home, but he also is the game master for Deal or No Deal Island. And most
importantly, they had a trailer on set for him and Bubbles,
which is the most important thing. Yeah, Bubbles was very well taken care of in the heat. So go watch Deal or No Deal Island with Joe as the host. But also, I do want to say thank you to Jonathan Nesvadba, who edits the audio for this podcast, and Mike Formanski, who edits the video and also shot on the day. Also, Jonathan did record on the day. And I want to say thank you to Human Content, who puts this podcast out into our world.
And I think that's everything.
I think so.
So we'll see and talk to you guys in 2 weeks, mm-hmm. and we'll have hopefully some more interesting news and announcements in 2 weeks' time.
Got a lot going on this year.
So we'll talk to you soon.